Well, hello everybody, and a very warm welcome to this occasion. I'm Peter McKew, the Chair of the History Council of Victoria, and we're delighted to have you here. Of course, I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we're gathered for this function, and their continuing connection to land, culture and community. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all First Nations people. For those of you who don't know, the History Council of Victoria is the peak body for history in the state of Victoria. We have a board, many of whom, or some of whom you're going to be hearing from this evening, which ranges very widely across all of the professions and institutions that are at the core of history or have history as their core. That's to say, we have representatives from universities, from school teachers, but also from museums, galleries, libraries, professional historians, the History Teachers Association, someone from this place, the Public Record Office of Victoria. So a broadly based board of representatives of lots of institutions for whom history is of fundamental importance. And our particular mission, our particular goal is to sustain what we sometimes call historical literacy, an awareness of the importance of history, its importance for citizenship, but also its importance for enjoyment. We believe strongly that an awareness of history really gives us a deeper experience of life and enables us to understand the world much better as well. Let me say something about this event. About this time last year, an undergraduate from Melbourne University, Harper Hamilton Grutzner, approached me and asked if she could do an intern position at the History Council. And the reason she gave to me was that she loved history, but she wasn't sure how to follow that love into the world outside university. Was the only thing I could do, she said to me, to keep studying history, to do a master's thesis, a PhD or whatever. What are the various options? And thanks to Harper, after some conversations, she came up with the idea of having an event like this, both in person and online. We've got a lot of people who'll be watching this online, where a range of people from our board could talk to you about the way in which their historical studies have led them into such a different array of professions afterwards, that there are many options that people have. We're delighted finally that the Public Record Office has agreed to sort of co-sponsor this event this evening in this lovely facility and providing the technical expertise to make it work as well. But now, Harper, over to you. Where's Harper? Over to you. There's your mic.
Thank you.
Clap for Harper.
Thank you, Peter. Hi everyone, I'm Harper Hamilton Grutzner, an intern with the History Council of Victoria. I'm currently in my final year of an arts degree at the University of Melbourne, majoring in history. So as Peter's sort of recapped, at the beginning of the year, as I approached the end of my degree, I realised that I really had no idea what career paths were open to people who had completed a history degree. From talking with friends, it seemed like academia or law were the only two options. I had no idea how one even became a historian, so I decided to reach out to anyone and everyone I could who had some sort of link with history. I cold emailed a lot of people, and Peter was one of the few who very kindly responded. I told him that I wanted to gain some experience in the field of history outside the university setting and learn what people who had studied history actually did day to day. This is where the idea for this event was born. So I wanted to explore and showcase the diverse career opportunities available to history graduates. Tonight, you'll hear from 7 fantastic panelists, each with a unique career path despite their shared background in history. After their presentations, we'll have time for a Q&A, so you can ask any questions you might have. First, however, we'll hear from Tara Oldfield, the Deputy Chair of the History Council of Victoria, and the Communications and Online Engagement Officer here at Prov, who will introduce us to the venue and the organisation. Please give Tara a round of applause.
Hi everyone. I'm Tara Oldfield, the Communications Advisor here at Public Record Office Victoria. I'm also Deputy Chair of the History Council. And yeah, I just wanted to say a few words first up about our venue and about Public Record Office, and welcome you here, especially if you've never been here before, and also welcome to those online. I hope you can see sort of a small snapshot of the space. I also wanted to just briefly share the ways in which I thought that Public Record Office could help you in your career, how engaging with us and coming back to this building could be a good idea for you. So in this building, right beneath our feet, we have the State Government Archival Collection. It includes records like plans, maps, petitions, some of those you can see on the walls, government photographs, crime records, which are my favourites to delve into, court records, prison records, wills, probates, records about schools, hospitals, I mean, you name it, any government agency. And quite a lot of that collection is digitised and available on our website. So I think the website is prov.vic.gov.au. It's up there. So I highly encourage you, if you've never been on our site and seen our collection, to have a look, have a bit of a play and see what you can find. I have to breathe. Anything not digitised, you can order to view here in the reading room. And that's really, I think, the magic of archival research, is being able to come in and hold that historic document in your hand. That's so helpful to whatever you're working on. It's really special. And I believe that being able to navigate the archival collection in that way and engaging with us could help you when seeking a role in, you know, as a historian or a researcher, or any position such as that down the line. You know, if you can go into a job interview and say, oh yes, I know how to do this, I know how to research at Prov, I go to the archives all the time, I think you'll be up here, way ahead of everyone else. We also have a volunteer program, so we will be looking to gain some new volunteers next year. So if that's something of interest to you, start having a think about it now. We've got some information on our website and a waiting list. So volunteers assist us with indexing and digitising historical documents. And many of our volunteers actually go on to work here. So, excuse me. So it's a great avenue and a great way to get some experience with historical records. So yeah, I encourage you to look on our website and start thinking about that if that's something you might want to explore next year. We also host regular history events like this one, and discussions in this room and online that you might find interesting. So I hope that we see you all back here in the future, online or in person, either researching our collection, volunteering with us, attending an event, or perhaps even working here one day. So thanks for coming. Thanks for organising, Harper. And I hope you enjoy all the presentations. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tara, and thanks again to Prov for hosting this event here. Our first speaker tonight is Nell Musgrove, an Associate Professor of History at the Australian Catholic University in Melbourne, who specialises in the history of child welfare systems, childhood and Australian social history. Her work not only challenges contemporary notions of social justice, but also strives to make underrepresented histories more accessible through digital mediums. Please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you, everyone who braved Melbourne's weather that it turned on for us tonight. It's lovely to see you. If you love history, am I close enough to the... Oh. If you love history and you're thinking about studying it further or making a career of it, go for it. I came to this realisation kind of late in the piece. I remember reading history since I was in primary school. But in high school, we were all really encouraged to do maths and science if you can. And I was quite good at that. So I was a maths and science student. And in fact, because we were all really, do the smart thing, do a degree that's, going to get you a good job, I started my studies at University of Melbourne as an engineering and arts double degree student. But after a while, I realised that I was getting very little joy from my engineering studies. It's great for some people, but it wasn't me. And that what I really wanted to do was study history and politics. So that's what I ended up actually completing. And then I got to the end of my honours year in history and I wasn't ready to stop studying. So I did a master's by research, which means sort of like a mini PhD. It's just a thesis, no more subject work. And then by the time I was starting my PhD, I was really starting to think about, well, where is all this heading? Like, this is great, studying this really interesting stuff, but where am I heading? And at the time, there weren't really events like this around that exposed me to the idea that there's so many different things that you actually can do, bouncing off all kinds of different levels of study in history. So for me, I decided that it was enough for me that I just really wanted to do the PhD, even though by then I was already thinking, wow, wouldn't it be great if I could get a job at a university and work at a university as a historian, which luckily enough for me, I was able to do. I think it's great to have that ambition, but even at the time, I knew that not everybody gets to do that. It's quite, you have to be at the right place in the right time and be the right person to get your foot in the door. It's absolutely still worth doing those studies, but what's great now, because of conversations like this, you can think about all of the different things that having a PhD in history can give you a huge step forward in doing after your studies. So you don't have to put all of your eggs in one basket, but if you do want to be an academic, the PhD is kind of the entry qualification. So most people don't go through a master's anymore like I did. So it's, 3 to 4 years of undergraduate and then 3 to 10 years of a PhD. So that's kind of my journey of how I got to this job. And in the time that I've got left, I'll just say a little bit about, what I do as an academic. What's that actually like? Some historians will work in schools that have a whole bunch of historians and that it's just a school of history. I work in a school within Australian Catholic University that's called the School of Arts and Humanities. So one thing I really love about my job is that there's a bunch of other historians around me, but I'm also working alongside literary studies people and media studies and even visual art and sociology and music. Like, it's amazing to be going to work with people who have so many different fields that they are so expert in and so passionate about. And the kinds of conversations that you have in the corridors are really, really a wonderful part of the job. So the big picture, it's my job to be an expert on a particular area of history, and usually for most people that area is in some way related to your PhD. So it's good to start thinking kind of early in your studies about the things that you find most exciting, because you'll spend a lot of time with that subject area, so you better like it. So part of my job is research, a big part of my job, and I have lots and lots of freedom in that part of my job to choose the research projects that I want to do, who I will collaborate with, what collections I might look at. I have spent many, many hours of my life right here at Prov. I absolutely love the Prov archive. It's one of my favourite places to be, as some of us were saying earlier. Then it's my job to publish about my research. That might mean journal articles, it might mean writing books. But research can have a bit of a reputation for being something that happens off in an ivory tower, and jokes about, oh, well, you know, whoever reads a journal article except, you know, the 10 subscribers to the journal or something like that. But it doesn't have to be like that anymore, particularly in my research. I do a lot of research on child welfare history, which is about people who were separated from their families as children and grew up in institutions and foster care. And that has a huge social significance now for the care leaver community and for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. And there's so many opportunities to take research that happens in a university setting and to communicate and collaborate with people for whom that history is really important and it really matters. And that's a really rewarding thing to do. And it is an example of how you can be an academic and there might be parts of your job that are like old-fashioned 19th century professors that we might see in the movies, but it's so many other ways in which you can engage with the real world. It's also part of my job to teach, and when you're teaching, you're generally having to teach a little bit further outside of your area. So although I have taught one unit that is really on the history of child welfare, most of the teaching that I do is a little bit wider than that. So, and that's typical because you've got to teach all of the different subjects. Well, not you one person, but between the team of historians, you've got to teach all of the subjects that everyone doing history at your university is going to study. So that means delivering lectures, standing up in front of, you know, maybe a few hundred people at a time, and telling them about the topic of the week. It means taking tutorials, which are smaller groups, maybe 15 to 30, where you can have different kinds of discussions about the weekly topics. It means designing subjects and designing assessments, and it means marking, but that's not all bad. And another thing that I do is supervise research students. So the next group of people coming through doing honours and masters and PhDs, I get the pleasure of talking with them about all of the exciting ideas that they're having about their research. So that's it in a nutshell, what an academic does, and a little bit about my journey to get there. So yeah, I hope that's been interesting and maybe a little bit inspiring to keep studying history.
Thanks so much, Nell. Our next speaker is Katherine Sheedy, who is a consultant with Way Back When Consulting Historians, a team of professional historians who work with individuals and groups to produce histories in a variety of forms, including books, websites, exhibitions, and oral histories. With experience in heritage research and exhibition interpretation, Katherine has authored histories on businesses, educational institutions, medical bodies, and community groups. Please give her a warm welcome.
Thanks, Harper. Really pleased to be here this evening. As Harper mentioned, I am indeed a professional historian. Now, many people have no idea what this is or that you can make a living this way, but I am here to tell you that not only is this possible, but I absolutely love what I do. I'm a director and a principal historian at Way Back When Consulting Historians, which I formed together with a colleague and friend 20 years ago when we were university students. Way Back When is now a team of 4 historians, as you can see up there, and together we work on a huge variety of history projects. A bit of background about how I got to where I am. I completed a Bachelor of Arts majoring in history and anthropology with honours in history at the University of Melbourne. And then after working for a few years, I enrolled in the Master of Public History at Monash University, which sadly is no longer offered. Doing the Masters inspired me to think quite differently about a career in history, and this is when Sarah and I started to consider the option of becoming professional historians ourselves. We were not entirely sure at the time where this would lead, whether it would be a full-time work, but the idea was that together we would have a stronger skills base that would make up for the fact that we didn't have much experience at the time. So at first it wasn't full-time work for either of us. We did some small projects while we worked in other jobs and tried to build up some experience. And eventually the timing was right and we decided to take the plunge, and Way Back When full-time version was born. So what kind of work does a professional historian do? My work falls into various categories, but all of it is about finding ways to communicate the past. So being a historian is about narrative and about storytelling. So professional history work includes things such as commissioned histories, which are often commissioned around the times of milestones for organisations or companies. And they weave together research based on primary and secondary sources, as well as oral histories, into dynamic and engaging narratives. As I think Harper mentioned, my team's produced histories of medical bodies, tertiary institutions, schools, hotels, community groups and sporting groups, to name just a few. At the other end of the spectrum to that, exhibitions and interpretations consider space and how people interact with dimensions and images, text and 3D, and I think you're going to hear more about that tonight. And writing interpreted text is something that we also do, and it's a completely different art to writing long-form commissioned histories. Heritage is another arm, and that involves researching the stories of places, land, buildings, and finding out about how these tie together and make sense of our built environment. I think you'll also be hearing more about that tonight. And that includes coming to places like here at Prov to use the records that they have here. So as well as doing work for architects and archaeologists, my team's prepared thematic histories, significance assessments, and things like heritage interpretation strategies. Talking to people is key to bringing things to life, and oral histories underpin almost all of our projects. As well as undertaking oral history interviews as part of our research for different histories that we write, we've done a range of standalone oral history projects and created things like podcasts and radio programs. And digital history has been an area of increasing work for us over the past decade or so. Creating online histories enables us to reach a much wider audience than books or exhibitions often, and using technology we can incorporate audio and digital stories. So if you enjoy history, and I'm guessing everyone here tonight does, so that is reading and synthesising material, primary and secondary research and writing. If you're self-motivated, if you enjoy setting deadlines and being challenged, then I would definitely encourage you to think about working as a professional historian. There are many options for professional history. So as well as consulting, there are positions in local government, the museum sector and heritage companies as well. But do be aware that consulting also entails a lot of small business knowledge. So I've had to learn practical things like a business name and a logo, setting up a website, being on top of insurance and contracts and finances, networking, and also having a contingency plan if you don't have enough paid work. But if you do want to consult, this stuff is all really important, so don't be put off. It's very empowering and it adds another dimension to your skill set. If you are interested in working as a professional historian, and I hope some of you are, there is a group to help you with all of this. You can see the logo there. The Professional Historians Association, or PHA, is a group of around 250 professionally accredited historians working in public history across Victoria and Tasmania. The PHA promotes history as a profession and provides professional historians with support and assistance in their day-to-day work. It offers professional development, material to help you as a professional historian, an employment service, regular events and sessions, and most importantly, networking opportunities and a support base. I joined the PHA when I was a master's student, and it was a huge benefit as an early career professional historian. Now, membership does require academic qualifications as a historian, and that's a minimum of an honours degree in history. So keep plugging away if you're not there yet. And I don't have any material here, I apologise, but make a note of the name PHA Vic and Tas and check out the website or socials, and keep it in mind as an organisation that you may wish to join in the future. So my main takeaway is that being a professional historian, it can be a constant juggle of jobs and workflow, but it's also full of variety and it's extremely rewarding. So I'd encourage everyone here to think about it as a career option. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Katherine. Our next speaker is Deborah Tout-Smith, who is the Senior Curator in the History and Technology Department at Museums Victoria, overseeing collections and exhibitions related to domestic life, military history, and more. Her curatorial expertise is complemented by her roles on historical boards, and her scholarly work includes influential publications on museums and exhibitions. Give her a warm welcome.
Thank you, thank you. That picture is me in my happy place in a collection store with a collection. It's actually a personal collection of a soldier who came back from World War I and put all sorts of personal mementos in a little suitcase, and as we know, shut the lid and left it for more than half a century. And then it came into the museum collection, and was my job to make sense of it, and it's such a privilege. I've always had a love of history, as I suspect most people in this room have. So I studied history and prehistory and sociology as an undergraduate at La Trobe University, which then, and still does, had a terrific history department. And I did my honours thesis on 17th century English food practices. Frankly, Australian history would have been a better choice in retrospect, but I think, you know, when you have an opportunity to follow your passion and you've found a topic you're inspired by, that's what you do. But I really wanted to work in museums, so I volunteered at Museums Victoria in what was then the history department. And during that time, I was encouraged to do a Master of Arts in Public History at Monash, which was a fantastic course. I rue the day that was closed. There's other good courses though. I was fortunate then to get some short-term curatorial contracts at the Museums Victoria before I secured an ongoing role in the history department at the Western Australian Museum as a curator. I spent 5 years there before I moved to the United States and worked at museums including the Ohio Historical Society, and I moved to Canada and worked at the University of Alberta Museums and Collections Service, and then later the San Diego Museum of Art. I was overseas for about 3.5 years and decided to come back to Australia, and I was fortunate to find an ongoing role at Museums Victoria, which had always been my dream. And I came back first as Curator of Cultural Diversity, and then I became a curator, then Senior Curator of Home and Community, where I am now. Throughout my career, I also have been active in professional associations, including the Australian Museums and Galleries Association, the International Council of Museums, or ICOM, the American Alliance of Museums, and the Australian Historical Association and the Professional Historians Association too, so we have lots of crossovers. I'm currently on the executive board of the International Council of Museums based in Paris, which guides museums around the world, and without doubt that's one of the highlights of my career, to be able to do that and make that sort of difference. Another highlight for me was actually curating the exhibition World War I, Love and Sorrow at Museums Victoria in 2014. It ran until 2018, about the true costs of the war. And it's a sort of project many of us museum curators dream about, which is to do an exhibition which showed new ways of, which provided new ways of understanding and worked closely with community to present deeper and more insightful and more emotive and emotional histories. I want to share with you a few critical moments in my career trajectory and a few tips perhaps I could share with you. The story of a career can seem like a seamless journey, particularly for someone who's been in the career for a long time as I have. But frankly, there are always twists and turns and those sort of tipping points or seminal moments. For me, one of them was deciding that to volunteer while I was an undergraduate, to get experience in museums and curatorial work and think about trying out workplaces and roles to see how I could follow my love of history and objects of things. Another great decision was to do the postgraduate qualification, the Masters in Public History in particular, and I did a commissioned history as part of that Masters. Postgraduate qualifications, master's qualifications are critical to practice history in museums. I should say that we do have PhD students and graduates working in the museum as well, but it's not the door opener one might hope for. So just something to bear in mind, unless your PhD is particularly in material culture or an allied area for museums. Another tipping point for me was deciding to move for work. And I think this is a really critical decision if you want to work in museums and probably if you want to be a historian as well. So moving to Western Australia, moving to US, Canada, back to Melbourne, building different experience in different types of organisations and very different collections and different histories. And during the time I was moving overseas, of course, I had to take on allied roles because I wasn't, for instance, a specialist in US history. So I became a registrar and at one stage I curated an art exhibition without having an art background. But this all broadened my skill set and I just loved the experience, the breadth of that experience. Another moment for me was us seeing an advertisement for joining the ICOM Australia board. I thought, oh gee, I could give that a go. That might be quite interesting. And that decision has led me all the way up into the executive board in Paris over many, many years. Another interesting moment for me was deciding that I didn't want to go into management. When I started out, I thought, oh, my dream is to be a museum director. But then I found I absolutely love curatorial work, which in my case involves research, writing, developing exhibitions, interpretation, working with communities. I've also developed an interest in the strategic dimension of museum work, like policy and ethics and issues like justice and representation and decolonisation, voice, that sort of thing. But honestly, the daily grind of meetings and staff management and budgets that comes along with being more senior in an organisation like a museum is not for me. And some of you may be really enthused by that, but it's not for me. And me making that decision has meant that my career has been extraordinarily rich and fulfilling and has stayed where I need it to be. So just a few tips before I finish. So I'd say take every opportunity to develop a broad range of skills and do short courses in museum-related topics like object handling, label writing, editing, exhibition development. The Australian Museums and Galleries Association, for instance, does offer really great half-day courses or short courses, and you can really start to build up some skills that way. Several have also mentioned the opportunities around volunteering and internship. And if I should also say, if you can't physically volunteer, Digivol is a great opportunity to do online work describing collections and doing useful and fascinating things like transcribing journals and letters and the sort of stuff that we value being able to access collections digitally. But the Digivol team from all over Australia and all over the world every day are working to do these transcriptions. So that's a great way to develop your experience. Also look at opportunities at places you'd love to work. So Blue Sky thinking, I'd love to work at the Smithsonian. Well, actually they've got international paid internships that they offer every year to current students. So I would really just, Blue Sky, think big, and then absolutely international as well as national. And actually at Museums Victoria, we have more than 500 volunteer positions. So almost as many volunteers as staff, sometimes more. And we do also offer internships to current students, although sadly they're generally not paid internships. However, that's at least a local opportunity. I've mentioned moving for the job being important. And also going for jobs in allied areas to build your CV. So university research assistant roles, which I did, archives, which I also did, libraries, local councils, places that hold collections or do research or do public programs are all worth thinking more broadly about. The other thing I absolutely have to underline is the professional association membership, AHA, PHA, ICOM, AMAGA. I'm going to say the History Council of Victoria. I can't not mention the History Council of Victoria, which is the reason we're here and which is a wonderful way of connecting with a history community locally. These organisations provide vital networks, professional development, job opportunities and fantastic annual conferences and gatherings. Another couple of things, lifting your profile is really important, getting known. It actually, for museums and history generally, the networking is really, really vital. To get known by conference coming up, put your hand, offer to be a panellist, even if you don't really feel you could cope with delivering a paper sort of first up. Join committees for these associations, and I have to say emerging professionals are always welcomed with open arms. We don't get enough emerging professionals saying, actually, I think I'd like to do that, to have that experience. Offer articles for publication. Social media has some benefit inevitably, and I think LinkedIn is actually quite a strong network for museums, and Instagram, for instance, is used effectively by ICOM. So you will start to discover which social media, and it tends to be one or two only for these key organisations that are most effective. And my final tip is, if you can, find a mentor. So find someone with years of experience in your chosen profession with lots and lots of connections And it's okay to say to someone, would you be my mentor? The person might say, oh, I'm too busy, but perhaps this other colleague might be a great support for you. So we all, every one of us in the museum has people we mentor, and that's very, very important for emerging professions. So thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Deb. Our next speaker is Dr. Helen Doyle, who brings over 2 decades of heritage experience to her role at GML Heritage, where she develops thematic histories and heritage assessments. She also works with traditional owners to develop cultural values assessments and has published local histories. Please give her a warm welcome.
Hi, everybody. Great to see you all. So a career trajectory for historians may not always run in a straight line, or even always seem to be moving forwards at all. When starting out as a professional historian, there may be periods when paid work is hard to find, things may stall or come to a complete stop. But like many career choices that feel more like a vocation than a means of paying the bills, although that of course is a critical necessity, I think your personal commitment to finding work in history will pay off in the end, so to speak. I've worked as a heritage consultant for more than 20 years and I'm currently at GML Heritage in Melbourne, which also has offices in Sydney and Canberra. GML is one of the largest heritage agencies in Australia. The Melbourne office of GML was formerly Context, which some of you may have heard of, which was a consultancy founded by Chris Johnston in the mid-1980s. My entry point, like many of the other speakers, to my work as a professional historian in heritage was through the Masters in Public History program at Monash University in the 90s, which was a fantastic course. Maybe we can bring it back. And despite the recession at that time, the 1990s was a bit of a golden age for heritage in Australia. There was a lot of funding at state and national levels for all sorts of reports. We had the Australian Heritage Commission, which did a lot of great work. And I think a lot of the professionals who really sort of were working at their peak at that time are now sort of regarded as the kind of parents of heritage. And I guess I had the privilege of working with some of those people, which was great. But the Public History Masters program introduced the students to some of the basics of heritage. It did a lot of other areas, like we did museums and media and something else I've forgotten, and heritage. But the heritage component was where I, was really interested. We got to go out on field trips with fantastic teachers, did exciting things like measured drawings and map reading, and got to sort of learn about the cultural landscapes and how to map and understand what we see in the physical landscape, and then go into the archives and try and understand those places through land records, etc. It was a lot of fun, as you can imagine. Sorry, I'm just... Sorry. And from that point, I picked up some small consultancy jobs, or sub-consultancy jobs, really just doing kind of menial research assistant work. I had a great mentor in Richard Aitken, heritage consultant who I did a lot of work with, and he taught me a lot about heritage reports and historical landscapes, and that really led to Context, a job with Context, which is now GML. And in a large organisation like GML, and it's a bit like, Nell, what you were saying about your work environment, there's a lot of really different jobs within the heritage sector. So we're working with, I'm an historian, but working with archaeologists, architects, planners, designers, and it is very stimulating and, very rich and rewarding work. Great conversations and, lots of great conferences now again, and lots of opportunities. And that just reminds me to, Deb, what you were mentioning about the young professionals. There is a young professionals sector of ICOMOS. So if there are any of you out there who are interested in heritage work, ICOMOS is a great organisation to join, and that's the admin of that is through the Deakin University Heritage Department. So I guess a little bit about what I do. A lot of the heritage work that big consultancies do is for state and local government and other public authorities. We have, you know, other like private clients, but really that's not, it's not a large component of our work. So a lot of the time is spent writing reports, but those reports are very varied. You might be doing a study of a very small place or a landscape, and that might range to a very broad scale thematic history, for example, which is a bit like writing a master's thesis. Increasingly, we're working with traditional owners to understand better the values that they have about heritage in the local environment, and how understanding about the places that they are significant to them can help protect that heritage. Of course, there's another, I work in what's called sort of built heritage or non-Aboriginal heritage, but there is another whole dimension of Aboriginal cultural heritage, which is really more from an archaeological background. So sort of traditionally historians work more in the built heritage environment, and archaeologists work in the Aboriginal cultural heritage environment. But increasingly there is a crossover, and I work a lot on cultural heritage assessments with traditional owner groups, which is really, you know, fantastic work. As we all know, we are living in very changing times at the moment, and heritage is unfortunately sort of being cast in a bit of a negative light with all of the other pressures in terms of, you know, public land, housing, etc. But as long as, I'm just kind of trying to plug heritage so you're not disillusioned, but as long as we have local, state and federal legislative frameworks to protect places in the environment, which we will, I imagine, always have, there will always be work in heritage, and there will always be work for historians in heritage. And increasingly, I think, work for historians to try and better understand those places, and to understand the complexity and the diversity of cultural values that people, communities, variety of communities understand and connect with places in different ways. And we're seeing increasingly local government level heritage is looking to better represent LGBTIA plus heritage. It's looking to understand better climate change and sustainability considerations in their heritage assets. And it's also, as I mentioned before, many local government authorities are looking to integrate traditional owner values into their broader heritage understanding. So it's a really changing area, I think, that's reflecting the changing world that we're living in, and the changing values that people attach to heritage. Back in the 90s, it was really about architecture. Heritage was kind of architecture, and the historical significance factor wasn't as well understood or appreciated, and that certainly changed now for the better, in my view. So I guess just following on from some of the other suggestions, I'm trying to think about some, you know, takeaway tips, and as well as the volunteering and internship. And a lot of heritage consultancies do offer internships, which is certainly worth pursuing, because you do get the experience of working on a project and having hands-on, you know, role to play. But also try and, I think, if you can, use some of the work that you're doing at university, whether it's a master's thesis or a long theology project or an honours thesis, which might have some kind of, you might be able to find an avenue to have published or to speak at a conference about that work in a way that might get your name, you know, recognised for that particular topic. You might be the expert in X or Y, which might become a really useful way of getting a job, or even as a sub-consultant on a project. You know, put yourself out there The other thing is just connecting professionally where you can with young professional organisations, and also just LinkedIn is really a great way to sort of have a look around and see who's sort of out there and doing the sort of work that you're interested in, and just connect and say, you know, I'm interested in what you do, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's sort of, I think, all I've got to say. And I guess just to finish, you know, it's working as a professional historian is, you know, still a kind of a less common career choice to make, but it is a very richly rewarding one, enjoyable work and great job satisfaction.
Thanks so much, Helen. Our next speaker is Dr. Bronwyn Cook, who has dedicated 20 years to teaching history in schools serving diverse communities and currently represents the History Teachers Association of Victoria on the HCV board. With a PhD focused on the Vietnam War's portrayal in education, she is a passionate advocate for quality history education. Please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the microphone. I do represent the HTAV, the History Teachers Association of Victoria, and I'm wearing their merchandise. Just for the record, it says History Buff. Thank you. Yes, so my name's Bronwyn Cook. I've had the absolute privilege of being a history teacher for 20 years. Which is slightly shocking, but I still love it. I've taught at Doveton and Dandenong High School, government secondary schools, obviously, in the southeastern suburbs. I came to teaching in a slightly different route. So I was a massive, massive history nerd at school, and I had two main passions, history and music. So I was actually working in a record shop. If you've ever seen Empire Records, very similar. And I was working in a record shop and absolutely loving it. And I did my dip ed, and I'd already done my double history major at Monash. And it got to the point where the record industry was shifting and physical record shops weren't going to be around for very long. So I decided I'd give the whole teaching caper a go, and started teaching at Doveton and absolutely fell in love with it. So at Dandenong, we have over 100 first languages spoken by our students. A third of our students are refugees, and another third of our students are children of refugees. So we have an extraordinarily vibrant, amazingly diverse culture. And contrary to what might sometimes be alluded to in media, it works, and it works beautifully. We have an extraordinarily supportive principal in relation to history courses, so we have quite a lot of history students, which again is fantastic. So I'm very, very passionate not just about history and learning about it, but teaching it. I love being in the classroom. So much so that I was actually on the trajectory going up into administration, leadership, that sort of thing. And I realised one day when I'd suspended a kid and I was doing timetables that I was spending most of the time in front of a computer. And I thought, no, that's not for me. That's not what I'm about. So I jumped off that ladder and I went back into the classroom and I started doing my masters. So the school supported me with a scholarship to be able to do Masters of Asia. Yeah, Masters of Asian History predominantly. And then they also supported me to go part-time so I could do my PhD. Since completing the PhD, I've been working at both Monash University as a teaching associate, so tutor, part-time lecturing, and also research as well, which I've done some really fun research on education and history in relation to UNESCO and OECD and things like that. Bless you. And I'm currently also, a tutor and lecturer in the education department focusing on humanities. But I missed school so much. I'm the one person who has gone back to teaching for their mental health. I missed it so much that I actually decided to go back and tutor at Dandenong for 2 afternoons a week, so I could sleep in. So I've been doing that on Tuesday and Wednesdays, and I go in and I help senior staff with their resources. I give mini lectures to various different subjects. So we were discussing earlier, there's an amazing Year 12 lit group, and they were doing a collection of poetry that had a lot of allusions to art history and specifically famous works of art. And I realised that it's quite possible that our students, many of whom didn't grow up in Australia necessarily or didn't have necessarily a lot of schooling, formal schooling, because a lot of grown up in refugee camps and stuff, may not necessarily know about Klimt's Judith. So I went and I did a mini lecture for them just to give them a bit of contextual background regarding that, and so they'd actually be able to delve into the literature and the poetry a little bit more. So I've been doing a lot of that work as well. So 2 half days at Dandenong, supporting the Senior Studies Centre, which, as I said, I absolutely love. And the bottom line for me is I get to learn and teach history for a living, and they have to listen to me because I can yell. No, because it's just such an extraordinary thing to be able to wake up and go to work and be smiling. And to just say, I'm one of those people who has the extraordinary privilege to do what they love, absolutely love. And it's not just watching a documentary on the weekend because SBS has got another fantastic run of Vietnam War history stuff on it again or something like that. I can do that every day. And that is just such an extraordinary thing to be able to say. So some of the topics that I've been able to teach on, we made castles when we did medieval Europe. I got a bit carried away. I know that's a surprise. Some of the castles were so big, 3 students could fit in them, which of course they loved doing, especially before I got into the room. Where is everybody? Oh, good, that again. Absolutely fantastic time. Lots of dress ups. Can't help myself. Banquet at the end of every term. Dressing up gods, goddesses, famous figures from history. Bring a plate of food from the 1700s. That got interesting. I've taught ancient Australia, I've taught ancient Europe, I've taught Vikings, with one very interesting lesson when we may or may not have dressed up as berserkers and run across the school oval. Ottomans, the Mongols, medieval Japan, where we started building Shinto temples. We've done the Industrial Revolution. This is a really cool tip. If you do end up teaching and you've got a lot of kids who are moving into trades, one of the easiest ways to teach history is to find something that they really love and are passionate about. So for instance, with the Industrial Revolution, we looked at the history of the engine. And they did a cool timeline of visuals as well as writing from the earliest engines up until their favourite F1 car, you know, and they got really a bit too into it, actually. We had like timelines going all around the room, which was great fun. Obviously, according to my personal interests, I've spent a lot of time teaching 20th century war histories and Australia's involvement and relationship to 20th century war histories. World War II and Vietnam are my specialties. Also 1960s, cultural revolutions. If you can't teach the 1960s, you might want to think of a different career because it's awesome and amazing and you can have some fantastic time with the music and art and culture and politics. And I've taught pretty much every VCE history that has been on offer, which for that little nerd inside all of us is just one of the most joyful things, to be able to learn new subjects. I had never studied the Chinese Revolution, so I was a few lessons ahead of the students, obviously, but being able to delve into that, an area of history that had not been my main area, was just completely joyful. And I think that for me, that's what I want to put across about teaching history. A lot of people understandably talk about the difficulties, and there are some, you know, I'm not skipping around the schoolyard all the time. But I think people often forget about the joy and the genuine fun and the genuine passion and the genuine interest that you get from students from all walks of life. And to be with them when often, and this has happened hundreds of times for me, when they've been the first person in their family to graduate Year 12, and be there with their families when they're doing that, and to have had a part in that is just a very, very special thing. And you have so much fun. Building castles, come on, it's great. And that's me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Bron. Our next speaker is Stephanie Holt, who is the part-time executive officer for HCV. She specialises as an editor of cultural and sports history, and her background includes editing for prominent magazines and journals, as well as supervising PhD and master's theses. Please give her a warm welcome.
Pardon my voice. Can you hear that? Great, because I've got a cold, so I'm the one doing the embarrassing snuffling down the front. I identify not as a historian, but as an editor, which people often think is, must be kind of fascinating because you work on films or music, but actually I do old-fashioned editing, working with words. And editors work for a range of clients, so you can work directly with individual authors, or you can work with publishers. And publishers are more than book publishers. They might be galleries, museums, other government institutions or organisations. The sky's the limit. Really broad range. So as an editor, and particularly a freelance editor, you might be worth unpacking a little bit more what editors are and can do. And also why I'm up here at a history event. Well, firstly, to make the point that I've ended up with the History Council of Victoria because I've always loved history. I was one of those history nerds. I built my castle in Form 3. Oh my God, what I could do with a bit of wallpaper and cardboard and cellophane for the water in the moat. But you also learn a lot of skills and call on a lot of skills as an editor that are very transferable, and they mesh really well with an interest in history and skills that relate to working in the history sector. So attention to reading, to researching, fact-checking, an interest in words, nuance, storytelling, interpretation. Those are sort of underpinnings. I moved first into the editing, or eventually into the editing, but I never lost that that love of history, and that sense that intellectually I was a historian. My trade was as an editor. So editors can do the cliched things, correcting grammar, improving prose. That's the kind of copy editing and proofreading we do. But we can also nurture a book, a story, or an article idea in what we call development editing. We can give feedback on work in progress. So we call that structural editing, or a manuscript assessment, or even sensitivity reading. If there's, particular issues that might offend or distress readers, that might inadvertently send the wrong message in a well-intentioned author's work. And that's an area where you can bring usually personal experience to your, around your issues. Sorry, my brain's a bit fuzzy. You can work with, I'll jump. You can do quite a lot of project management type work in editing. So bringing out a book or a catalogue or some kind of, even a digital publication has many moving parts. You could be working with designers, photographers, writers across a range of different fields, specialists like cartographers doing maps. So sometimes an editor's working almost as a project manager, pulling a few those levers, keeping that team on track. You're also a support for your author. What's involved with publishing? Why do they feel confident to proceed? Do they trust themselves to do the work? So you're a bit of a hand holder, mentor, guide. So the editing work can be some or all of the above. Those connections to history, if it's something you love and you've thought that you might apply it in the sort of editing area, is that you can develop specialisations specific to history. So some that I've done is I've done a lot of work on sports history, I've done a lot of work on music history, and I've done a lot of work in art history. So it's wonderful. Every time you do a new project, you get to work one-on-one with the expert, the source, and help them produce their work. And it's sort of like it's an continual kind of intellectual stimulation. But if you're someone who is worried about going down that specialist track of being a professional and having to choose your thing, it's wonderful because you might be doing, you know, an obscure 19th century artist one month, and the next month you might be doing a country football team, you know, or a history of say, a fascinating family history. So it sort of keeps you on your toes in that way and gives you this sort of constant education as a sort of someone who loves history. It's also a love of history, and thinking like a historian gives you a huge advantage for any sort of generalist editing, because you usually have very good general knowledge, an eye for detail, an understanding of context and how important it is, and a kind of sensitivity to, say, consistency, and particularly anachronisms. That's one of the fun little things to do. You know, my favourite tool is a thing called Ngram, which you can go online and you can find out, gee, in the mid-1850s, would they have been more likely to use the word sofa or the word couch? And you can actually find it out. And actually, I'll tell you that one. I was looking at something that had used records from the Prov, coronial inquests, and they referred to someone being laid on their sofa. And when people saw that work, they always said, that word jars. And I had to go back and say, I actually tested that one. And in Australia at that time, it was used as or more often than couch. But then I had to think it like an editor. If everyone who reads that thinks that's wrong, is that worth being a stickler about, or is it better to change the word because you don't want the reader, you know, to be interrupted? So that's the kind of thinking you bring as an editor. And another area which is a really big growth area, there's two big growth areas, good areas for self-employed editors at the moment. So one is thesis and academic editing, particularly editing theses. So obviously if you have studied a history, you can specialise in history and related fields. So the theses I edit are often in art history or museum studies. And there's also a lot of people doing self-publishing around family history, and that's a terrific area as well that you can get into. And sometimes that even extends to, say, ghostwriting, which is a really fun kind of adjunct area. I fell into editing from doing a BA with a major in history. I developed that further with a graduate diploma in Australian Studies, focusing in history and art history. I did lots of volunteer and DIY type projects, so people talk about interning. I did my share of them, everything from kind of football fanzines to sort of feminist anthologies. And then I worked in magazines, literary magazines, specialist magazines. So it was a kind of a fairly unplanned trajectory in some ways, but that was part of the beauty of it. If you think you would like to explore editing, working in publishing, and bringing your love for history to bear in that area, then I'd certainly suggest volunteering in related work. You know, writing articles on local history for the local newspaper or a community group would be a good, or, you know, volunteering to help a local community organisation perhaps with their history research. Taking short courses, and there's no shortage of those offered by organisations such as Writers Victoria and IPED, the Institute of Professional Editors. And of course, there are formal qualifications you can undertake. So most universities offer diplomas or degrees in editing or editing and publishing, which are terrific. But you can acquire quite a lot of skills just with short courses well targeted on top of your historian's training. That could give you a kind of entree into some of this work. Related roles for editors, I just made a quick note, things like ghostwriting, indexing, comms. So you can see how easily you could move into the history related work with that kind of, those skills, and even admin. Hence, I ended up at the History Council of Victoria as one of my part-time jobs. Okay, so that's my spiel on being an editor and why it's a very fascinating, rewarding career for somebody who has a love of history, and for a historian who doesn't want to be pinned down being an academic or focusing on big, long projects or very specialist niches. It's a constant buzz. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Our final speaker is Molly McKew, who is the Publicity Officer for the HCV. She's worked in various communications and project officer roles in higher education and media over the past 10 years. She holds a PhD in history from the University of Melbourne, focusing on Melbourne's urban countercultures of the 1960s and 1970s, and has written for publications such as The Conversation and Overland Literary Magazine. Please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you so much. I got massive imposter syndrome being here. Some of my talk, my little spiel will be about that. I am the comms officer for the History Council of Victoria, and I have 2 other part-time jobs. And my trajectory has been extremely non-linear, and there's no shame in that. That's my message. And it's been quite enjoyable, actually. So I tallied all the jobs I've had since undergrad. I've had 8 professional jobs, 3 research assistant jobs, and 3 casual random jobs, one of which was curating the book section at Savers, which did use my history degree in some way. And the other one was doing singing execution ballads for a research project and uploading them to a database. And that was quite hard. I realised that I'm not as good at singing as I thought. So I did undergrad at Melbourne Uni. I did Australian Studies and Indigenous Studies, and did an honours year about the debate about banning the burqa, which happened in 2011. Not everyone will remember it, but so that was more sociology, cultural studies. And then I got a job doing programs and admin, basically, and kind of enjoyed that, to like get all my job skills together and running programs, and worked in a research institute where Peter actually worked too, had an office there. And then I decided that I always had wanted to be a writer, and I loved communications, so to get a job that was more comms oriented. So I got a job at a very fancy magazine as an editorial assistant, and then loved that so much that I decided to leave and get a PhD, because I was like, I want to be a writer. If they can do it, I can do it. So kind of inspired myself out of a job, left, did my PhD started when I was 28, and then finished it in 2019, just before COVID. And it was a privilege, really, to do it, to spend 3 years immersing myself in people's stories. I interviewed a whole heap of people that lived in Fitzroy, Carlton, and the inner urban space about their countercultural lifestyle, which was juicy and interesting, and decided that I was going to become a writer rather than an academic. And for various reasons, and I think one of them was to think about what kind of person you are and where you might belong, because I think when you work full-time, you're with those people all the time, you're in that community, and it's important to think about community as well as skills, I think, personally. So I kind of decided academia wasn't right for me. Maybe it's just because I wasn't good enough, I don't know. But during the PhD, I published in a few places, like The Conversation, and then since then, COVID was a bit of a weird one, because I lost my connection to the university community because I wasn't physically there anymore. I'd finished the PhD, all of my connections to the uni were cut off. But I just worked on my own writing projects in my spare time, and published a couple of times in Overland, Archer magazine. I kind of applied my history skills interviewing my mum about Brunswick in the 90s and published about that. And so, yeah, I'm kind of plugging away at various projects that use the skills from my PhD that include, I guess, interviewing, putting things in their context, writing, and I've done some reviewing for various magazines, like book reviews, which some of those are from the 70s, so it involves putting them in their context. So there's a lot of various ways you can use history in writing and communications. And yeah, working for the History Council also uses those skills. What else have I written down here? I've said follow your nose and trust your nose. I think if you've got an interest in history or humanities, it will manifest in some way if you kind of trust yourself and trust the process, not to sound like a hippie. But I think, yeah, I think there's no need to kind of panic if you don't walk out of undergrad and get a job as a historian. I think there's a lot of different ways to, you know, use that interest, and that will show in your work or show where you choose to go. And so, yeah, the non-linear thing is scary, but it's also more likely in the cultural context of short-term contracts, of underfunding. So it's something to probably get used to end on a realist note. Yeah, that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Molly, and thank you to all our speakers tonight for a really fascinating and informative event. We now have some time for a Q&A, so if all of the panelists want to just bring a chair to the front, face the audience, and if anyone has any questions, now is the time to think about them. Does anyone have any questions for any or all of our speakers? Including people online, if they wanted to put their questions in the chat.
I'm happy to break the ice. I was thinking, I mean, it was an extraordinary array of careers and trajectories and so on. And I was thinking, so what are these people, what are the messages that have come out of this? And I'd be interested in your responses to these three. That one is obviously a passion for history. The second one is that, I think as you were stressing, Molly, there is no simple pathway, that so many of you found the career where you are now in circuitous ways. Things happen. But connected with that was the third message that I got, and that is the importance of taking some initiatives, that all of you had looked out for opportunities. And that's where the pathways thing came in, that by taking initiatives, talking to people, having a go at certain things, that pathways started to open up, and not necessarily things that you anticipated. So do any of you want to respond to that?
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I think all of those are really, really valid points. And that did actually, it might be a response to your question there. But one thing I always say to people that ask, and I forgot to mention it when I was speaking earlier, is that if you're offered an opportunity, say yes, even if you think, I don't know how to do that, and you'll learn how to do it. You can either learn before you have to start or while you're doing it, but don't ever say no because you think, oh, I don't think that's quite in my area, or I don't have enough experience. Just always say yes, and you'll be able to find someone to help you or to learn from, or just Google it and figure it out, you know. So just take opportunities when they come your way.
Can I add something to that? Just adding on to that as well, one of the things I forgot to mention earlier was I got asked if I wanted to help write some textbooks in areas that I had not taught, never studied, and I said yes. And I went, yes, I do. So I ended up working for Oxford University Press and got to write part of the chapter on Vikings, and may have inserted half a chapter on shield maidens, and just decided they needed a little bit of that in there because it was missing. And yeah, so now I've got that on the resume. Oxford University Press textbook author, and I get royalties every year, and I don't have to keep writing. So yeah, it's a good one.
I was going to say that I've taken opportunities and failed at them, and lived the worst nightmare of actually having someone say, that's not what we were looking for. And it was so humiliating and embarrassing, and I cried for a day but survived. They don't remember, I'm sure. I haven't remembered until just then. So, you know, if your ego, just trust that your ego can handle it if it does go wrong, which it probably will not.
Yes, I was just going to also say, yes, sometimes opportunities come up that are quite unexpected, and your training as a historian, as both an undergraduate and a postgraduate, can work in all sorts of mysterious and wonderful ways. The first major exhibition I ever curated was on the history of Fremantle. And once again, I first thought, I don't know, I'm not from Western Australia, how on earth can I be the person who does it? But actually, the skill set which I had built through the undergraduate, postgraduate work actually was what I needed to do the secondary research, follow the paths back to the primary research, put in practice some of the practice I'd had with writing for public audiences, and I pulled it off. Pulled it off. So it's extraordinary the paths you can take when you say yes against your inner no voice.
I guess I was just going to say, sort of, in addition to, I guess, taking risks and saying yes to opportunities that come along because they come along, it's also important to identify your strengths and to build on those strengths and to see opportunities out there that you can, find ways to get published or find small jobs to do that where you are the expert, I think, and build, sort of have, many strings to your bow. So do look out for opportunities that come along, but also build on those strengths that you have where you have a sort of a game advantage, if you like. So yeah, sort of, you've got to be thinking in different strategic ways.
Yeah, I was going to take up Molly's point, her story. I think one of the things, if you put your hand up to stretch yourself, is it's always worth. And I taught writing and editing for 20 years, so I'm thinking of the students I taught there. Yeah, put yourself out there. Don't hesitate. You'll learn. Fake it till you make it, we used to say. But the key things, always think about what the brief is, and don't be scared to come back and ask, who am I doing this for? What am I doing it for? Is this heading in the right direction? How about I do you a draft or I show you my notes? They're not tests. You don't have to deliver a perfect product to prove you could do it. It's a job of work. And so if you understand that process, who else is involved, who will have feedback, who can support you, who can tell you if you're going off the track before it's too late, then take advantage of that. That's actually being professional. And similarly, modelling professional behaviour is not thinking it has to be perfect, particularly if that means you're going to miss deadlines or put noses out of joint. People want to work with someone who's good to work with, and doing an okay job reliably, pleasantly, on time, and being open to someone, revising it or giving you a critique on it is a much stronger learning experience than is going to lead to, say, really good references and comments if you're using that to build professionally, than thinking that this is the assignment, you've got to go away and come back with something that will get A+, and drive yourself nuts and everyone else nuts in the process. So, it's a job of work and you treat it like that.
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions online. The first one is from Rebecca. She wants to know if there is a pathway to professional historian work that does not involve an honours degree. An honours year. So she has a double history BA and later a Master of Education by coursework, and wants to know if work experience and a not directly history related masters could be a pathway to a higher history studies.
Yeah, sure. I can respond to that. So if you're thinking of perhaps joining the Professional Historians Association, which I talked about earlier, there is an opportunity to make a case if you don't meet the eligibility criteria immediately on your initial studies. So it's worth looking into that because you can make a case for work experience. So having worked in an allied field, and increasingly now with what's happening with schools in universities, and that they're not always being a history department in every university. Now there are opportunities to still join the PHA if you haven't got an honours degree in history. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and the next one's from Brett. For those who have been or are editors, what would be their key pointers for getting a foot in the door?
It's very tough to get in-house work, but you can set up some freelance, work, usually starting with friends, associates. If you bring existing skills, start with those. So people will I often heard from people, I'm leaving that career because I want to be an editor. And in fact, the best advice was that prior qualification or work experience or knowledge is the thing that sets you apart from all the other people who've got the equivalent capacity to work as editors or qualifications or short courses that you've got. So you look for, perhaps organisations, friends, small publishers, self-publishing authors or organisations that connect with the stuff that you know in terms of as a historian, so the content areas, the discipline strengths, and then you offer to, be that person who can add the editing nous and skills to their work, and building up a little portfolio and some connections with volunteer projects is great. You want to be very selective with them if you're not being paid, but they can be very satisfying, and there's nothing like dropping a catalogue or a book or a journal in front of someone, say at an interview, to make the point that you do understand what's involved with this work.
We do need to wrap up, but I just wanted to check if anyone in the room had any questions before we wrap up.
I just want to comment on the obvious, which is here is a group of women, and I just wanted to emphasise that actually there's a series of circumstances which have led the group here today, but there are wonderful opportunities for people from different diverse backgrounds, and in fact we strongly and warmly encourage, I'm not going to just say men, people from all sorts of different backgrounds. It's incredibly important that the stories that we tell, the way we record, the way we investigate history represents the diversity of our community. So I would strongly and warmly encourage anyone who's thinking, yes, but I'm not a woman, like any of the panel here, please, we very, welcome Peter, please, we warmly and strongly welcome diversity amongst historians and all the professions that we have, and I just wanted to acknowledge that all is not as it seems, nor should be, but thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. If we would like to give our panel another round of applause, done in a fascinating event. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I hope you've learnt something and had a nice night.
Just one final word from me. I want to thank Prov again for hosting us. I want to thank our panellists, who I thought were just terrific. I think you'd agree. And I also want to thank the Jane Hansen Foundation. Jane gave us a small grant around this time last year and said, have a think about something, an initiative that you might develop next year. Along came Harper, and she was the person that came up with the idea of having an event like this, which I think has been terrific for people who are here and for many more people who are watching this online. So thanks very much, everyone. Don't forget there are some freebies on the table outside for you to take, and the very best with the career choices that you make along the way. Thank you. Great.